In every photograph, she is smiling. That is the first thing you notice about Eva Braun. The archive is surprisingly large. She was an enthusiastic amateur photographer and an early adopter of home movie cameras, and she documented her life at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat in Bavarian Alps, with the cheerful obsessiveness of someone who genuinely loved the medium. There are hundreds of images. Picnics on the terrace, dogs running across manicured lawns, friends laughing over dinner, summer afternoons that look, stripped of context, like the record of an ordinary and happy life. She is almost always smiling. For over 12 years, she was the partner of the most powerful and most feared man in Europe, and the German public had almost no idea she existed. She was kept from press photographs, excluded from official functions, forbidden from appearing at Hitler's side in any context that might reach the outside world. When Hitler appeared in public, Eva Braun was somewhere else. When dignitaries visited, she was sent to her room. When the Nazi propaganda machine constructed the image of Adolf Hitler that it projected to Germany and to the world, the ascetic leader, married to his nation, devoted entirely to the German people, without personal attachments or private weaknesses, Eva Braun was the secret it was built on top of. She lived inside that secret for more than a decade. And then, in a concrete room 50 feet underground, with Soviet artillery falling on the city above, she chose to die in it. This is the story of who she actually was, and why the regime that used her so completely worked so hard to make sure nobody would ever know. Eva Anna Paula Braun was born on February 6, 1912, in Munich. Her father was a teacher. Her family was Catholic, lower middle class, conventional in almost every respect. She attended a convent school run by English nuns and was, by the accounts of her teachers, an unremarkable student. She was interested in sports. She was a strong skier and swimmer and gymnast, and in fashion and film and photography. And she had the kind of undemanding social confidence that comes from being pretty and well-liked without being particularly interested in anything that required serious intellectual effort. She was 17 years old when she met Hitler. She was working as an assistant and occasional model for Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's official personal photographer and one of the very few people who controlled the visual record of Hitler's public image. Hoffmann's studio in Munich was a point of contact between Hitler's inner circle and the ordinary commercial world, and Hitler visited regularly. Eva Braun met him in the autumn of 1929. He was 40 years old. She was 17. He was introduced to her as Herr Wolf, a pseudonym he used casually in Munich in those years. She said later she had no idea who he was. Whether that is entirely true is difficult to know. By 1929, Hitler was not unknown in Munich. He had led the failed beer hall putsch 6 years earlier, had served prison time, and rebuilt the Nazi Party into a significant political force. His photograph was in the newspapers. His name was well known to anyone who followed German politics, which in Munich in 1929 was most people. What is clear is that the relationship developed slowly, and then, from Eva's side at least, with the intensity that would define the rest of her life.
Hitler's previous significant relationship had been with his half-niece, Geli Raubal. Geli was 20 years younger than Hitler and had lived with him in his Munich apartment from the late 1920s. The nature of their relationship has been debated by historians for decades. What is not debated is that it was possessive, controlling, and that Geli Raubal was deeply unhappy in the final period of her life. In September 1931, Geli Raubal was found dead in Hitler's Munich apartment. She had been shot with Hitler's pistol. The official verdict was suicide. Hitler was in Nuremberg when it happened. The circumstances were sufficiently ambiguous that alternative explanations have been proposed and investigated repeatedly, without definitive resolution. Hitler's response to Geli's death was, by the accounts of everyone around him, extreme. He refused food for days. He spoke of suicide himself. Several people who knew him said he was never entirely the same afterward. Eva Braun had been in Hitler's orbit for approximately 2 years when Geli died. The relationship between Hitler and Eva Braun intensified in the months following Geli's death. Whether this was grief seeking displacement, or genuine feeling, or simple proximity is impossible to determine from the outside. Probably it was all three. In November 1932, Eva Braun shot herself. She survived. The bullet entered her neck and missed her major blood vessels by a small margin. The circumstances were, on the surface, similar to Gelli's death: a young woman in a relationship with Hitler, a gunshot, and official account that minimized what had happened. The difference was that Eva Braun lived. Historians have generally interpreted the shooting as a cry for attention rather than a genuine suicide attempt, partly based on Eva's own later comments, which were characteristically breezy about the episode. Hitler visited her in hospital. After her recovery, the relationship became more serious and more settled. 3 years later, in 1935, she attempted suicide again, sleeping pills this time. She survived again. After the second attempt, Hitler arranged for her to move into a villa near Hitler's apartment. She was given an allowance, staff, and a degree of access to his world that she had not previously had. She became, in the language that the people around Hitler used privately and never publicly, the girlfriend. But girlfriend is entirely the wrong word for what she was, and entirely the wrong word for what she wasn't.
The relationship between Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun is one of the most scrutinized and least understood relationships in 20th century history. The scrutiny is understandable. The two people at its center are among the most consequential figures of the century, and the private life of a man responsible for the Holocaust and the Second World War is not an irrelevant biographical detail. The misunderstanding comes from the fact that almost all the primary sources about their relationship are either self-interested, incomplete, or filtered through the distorting lens of what came after. What can be established with reasonable confidence is this: Hitler kept Eva Braun almost entirely separate from his political and military life. She was not consulted on decisions. She had no political influence, no access to state affairs, no role in the apparatus of Nazi power. Senior Nazi officials who interacted with Hitler daily, men like Speer and Goebbels and Himmler, had almost no contact with her, and in some cases met her only a handful of times despite knowing Hitler for years. She lived primarily at the Berghof, the mountain retreat on the Obersalzberg above Berchtesgaden. It was a beautiful place. She had staff, freedom of movement within limits, a social circle of other women connected to senior Nazi figures. She skied in winter and swam in summer, and made her home movies and took her photographs. She was also, by any reasonable measure, a prisoner. She was forbidden from appearing in public with Hitler, forbidden from attending state functions, forbidden from being photographed alongside him. She could not acknowledge the relationship to anyone outside the immediate inner circle. She could not travel freely or live where she chose. Her entire existence was structured around Hitler's schedule and Hitler's preferences, and Hitler's need for her to be available when he wanted her and invisible when he did not. She had no career, no public life, no identity outside the one Hitler permitted her to have in private. Albert Speer, who knew her better than most senior Nazis, wrote in his memoirs that she was fundamentally a simple person, not unintelligent, but uninterested in ideas or politics or anything beyond the narrow world she inhabited. He described her as genuinely happy at the Berghof, contentedly domestic, apparently unbothered by the constraints of her situation.
Other accounts are less certain about the happiness. Her diaries, kept sporadically in the 1930s and later published, contain passages of genuine anguish about her position. She wrote about waiting, about Hitler's absences, about her sense that she existed for him only in the moments he chose to acknowledge her, about the humiliation of being sent away when important visitors arrived, about loving someone who treated her, in her own words, as a pastime. She burned most of her diaries before she died. What survived is a fragment. The German public did not know Eva Braun existed. This is not an exaggeration or a simplification. It is a precise description of a deliberate and sustained propaganda operation. Joseph Goebbels, who controlled the entire information environment of Nazi Germany, had constructed an image of Hitler that was essential to the regime's popular support. The image rested on several pillars, and one of the most important was the idea of Hitler as a man who had sacrificed personal happiness for his mission, who had no wife, no family, no private life, because Germany itself was his family, who was in a mystical union with the German Volk that left no room for ordinary human attachments. This image was enormously effective. It was believed genuinely and deeply by millions of Germans. It was part of the quasi-religious cult of the Führer that Goebbels had spent years constructing and that had proven extraordinarily resistant to contradictory evidence. Eva Braun was contradictory evidence. Her existence meant Hitler was not the ascetic mystic of the propaganda. It meant he had ordinary desires and an ordinary private life. It meant the image was a construction. And so she was erased from it, completely and systematically, for the entire duration of the relationship. Senior Nazi officials knew about her. Foreign dignitaries who visited the Berghof sometimes encountered her, introduced vaguely as a companion without further explanation. The inner circle was well aware of who she was. But the official record, the newsreels, the photographs released to the press, the biography authorized by the regime, contained nothing.
She was, in the most literal sense, an unperson. The psychological effect of this on Eva Braun herself is something historians have speculated about but cannot know fully. She never wrote directly about it in what survived of her diaries. The people who knew her described her as having accepted it, having internalized the reasoning, having convinced herself that the secrecy was necessary, and that her private knowledge of who Hitler was compensated for the public non-existence. Whether that was true acceptance or simply the only viable way to live inside the situation she was in is another question that cannot be answered from the outside. The war changed the texture of her existence without changing her fundamental structure. As Germany's military situation deteriorated, Hitler spent increasingly little time at the Berghof. He was at his various field headquarters, the Wolfslair in East Prussia, the Werewolf headquarters in Ukraine, the various command posts that moved with the front. Eva Braun was at the Berghof, waiting. The bombing of Germany brought the war to the Obersalzberg. Allied air raids targeted the area in April 1945, partly because it was known as the location of Hitler's retreat and the homes of senior Nazi officials. Eva Braun watched the Berghof burn from a distance. By that point, she had already made her decision. Hitler had told her to leave, to go somewhere safe. She refused. The people who knew her in those final weeks described the refusal as the most decisive thing she had ever done. She had spent 12 years being told where to go and when, and what she could and could not do. At the end, when it mattered and when the cost was everything, she said no. She arrived in Berlin in mid-April 1945. She went underground with Hitler into the Führer bunker. She was 33 years old. In the bunker, Eva Braun was finally visible. The constraints that had governed her existence for 12 years dissolved in the irrelevance of a collapsing state. There were no more press photographers to keep her away from, no more public image to protect, no more fiction of Hitler the ascetic to maintain. The people in the bunker all knew who she was and what she was to Hitler, and in those final weeks she moved through the corridors of the underground complex with a freedom and openness she had never had above ground. The accounts of people who were there describe her as the most composed person in the bunker. While generals argued and wept and collapsed into denial, while Goebbels gave speeches about Wagnerian endings, while the military staff processed increasingly fictional battle reports, Eva Braun drank champagne and danced with officers in the corridor and told Hitler's secretaries to try to get out while they still could. She had, by every account, completely accepted what was coming. She had chosen it. She had traveled to Berlin specifically to be there for it. There is something in this that resists easy interpretation. Was it love? It is difficult, given the nature of the relationship and the nature of the man, to use that word without qualification. Was it loyalty? To what, exactly, and to whom? Perhaps the most honest thing that can be said is that Eva Braun had organized her entire existence around one person and one relationship, had paid an extraordinary price for it across 12 years, and at the end, she was unwilling to let that price have been paid for nothing. She was going to be there. She had earned that, in whatever terms made sense within the logic of the life she had lived. On April 29th, the day before she died, Hitler married her. She had asked him, at various points over the years, whether they would ever marry. The accounts differ on how seriously she pressed the question and what his responses were. What is not disputed is that she wanted it, and that for years he refused. In the bunker, with Berlin burning above them, he agreed. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes.
She signed the marriage certificate Eva Hitler, then crossed out the B she had begun to write out of habit and wrote the full name, Eva Hitler. She was Eva Hitler for less than 48 hours. On April 30th, 1945, at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, Eva Braun took cyanide in the private study of the Führer bunker. She died before Hitler did. Her body was carried out to the Reich Chancellery Garden and cremated alongside Hitler's. The burning was incomplete. The remains were buried in a shell crater. The Soviets found them 4 days later. The Soviet autopsy confirmed cyanide poisoning. She was 33 years old. After the war, the Nazi propaganda machine that had kept Eva Braun invisible was replaced by a different kind of erasure. The early post-war accounts of Hitler's inner circle, the memoirs, the testimonies, the historical reconstructions, treated Eva Braun as a footnote, a curiosity, the dumb blonde who happened to be Hitler's girlfriend, an apolitical non-entity who had nothing to contribute to the historical record and no significance beyond her connection to the main subject. This assessment was wrong, in ways that have taken decades to begin to correct. Eva Braun was not a political actor. She had no role in the Holocaust, no involvement in military decisions, no influence on the course of the war. On those questions, the early assessments were correct. But the story of Eva Braun is not primarily a story about politics or military history. It is a story about how the Nazi regime constructed and maintained its own image, about how power uses the people closest to it, about what it costs a person to organize an entire life around a relationship that the other party in that relationship treats as a convenience. She was used by Hitler, who needed someone available and controllable and invisible, by Goebbels, whose propaganda required her non-existence, by a regime that built its appeal partly on an image of its leader that her existence directly contradicted, and that therefore made her disappear. She was erased while she was alive. She was erased afterward by the historians who found her uninteresting. The photographs remain, hundreds of them, the home movies, the smiling woman on the terrace at the Burkhof, surrounded by dogs and sunshine, in a life that looks from the outside like happiness. Whether it was happiness is a question she never fully answered. The diaries that might have told us she burned before the Soviets arrived. She was thorough about that, at least. Whatever she felt, it was hers. She made sure of it.